when GMOs were introduced, and also, of course, in 1994 when bovine growth hormone was introduced into the milk. So we think that there's a direct reason why there's runaway diseases and disorders, specifically among kids who are most susceptible. And I think that when we get rid of GMOs, we'll see a lot of that turn around.
What do you think about the fact that herbicides are built into these seeds?
Well, this is one of the brainchilds of industrial technology, which basically touts inputs like herbicides and pesticides and fertilizers because that's what they can make money from. Whereas if you have a diverse and sustainable system, you don't need these type of inputs, certainly to the extent that they're used now, and in many cases not at all. It was put onto the industrial agricultural system because of surplus military material after World War II. The nerve gas was used as pesticides. The bomb material was used as fertilizer. And so a lot of the attention and U.S. money and agricultural research has gone to support the agenda of the industrial agricultural system to promote the sale of these products, which ultimately cause environmental devastation and poor health because of the lack of trace minerals and nutrients in the crops. Now, so the building in of the insecticide into the crop is another step in this industrial model, and it's a very dangerous step.
It's frightening. It's absolutely frightening. I can't even believe it.
There's so much evidence that the Bt toxin is dangerous. When the Bt toxin by itself, which is created by the corn and the cotton, when it's just tested by itself in its natural form, it creates an immune response in mice. Now they find that when they feed mice the Bt corn, they also develop immune responses, showing that their bodies are rejecting it. One of the arguments that's made by the industry and also by the EPA is that Bt does not affect humans or mammals. But we have these mice studies that show that they do. We have the human studies or the human experience showing that hundreds of people are reacting to the Bt spray, and it also does bind with proteins inside the gut of primates. And we have so much evidence now that they completely have to turn a blind eye to even published peer-reviewed studies. Now, if we think about what Bt is supposed to do, it's supposed to break open the stomach of insects and kill them. Now, it turns out if it does cause leaky gut syndrome in humans, that can in turn cause autoimmune disease and allergies, and some people link that with autism. And these are the things that we're seeing on the rise.
Even with peer review, I did a whole piece on peer review. Even many of the peer review studies, they're fixed. Who's evaluating in the peer review? People don't even get to know who their accusers are, who doesn't like their work, or why they don't like their work. And so even with peer review, they can be fixed.
In fact, in Genetic Roulette, my second book, Part 3 catches the industry red-handed rigging their research. For example, in a peer-reviewed study where the FDA concluded, they just went along with the conclusions of the study, saying that pasteurization destroys 90% of the bovine growth hormone in milk. When you actually look at the study, they pasteurized the milk 120 times longer than normal, but they only destroyed 19% of the hormone. So they spiked the milk with 147 times the amount of hormone that's normally present, then heated it 120 times longer than normal, and then only under those rigged conditions destroyed 90%. And that's just one example of many, many peer-reviewed studies where when the experts look at it, who are not, biased, they find that it was designed to avoid finding problems, and in some cases, quite blatantly.
I did an interview with Robert Cohen, who you mentioned several times in Seeds of Deception, and really had my eyes opened about milk and cheese and what's happening with the milk industry. Frightening.
Absolutely. And Robert did point out, he did bring a lot of information to the surface about this bovine growth hormone in his research. And we also see a strategy now to try and change the labeling of it to make it impossible to label things as non-RBGH. And fortunately, an appeals court this year overturned a lower court's decision to allow Ohio to ban labels that say RBGH-free or RBST-free or artificial hormone-free.
See, this to me is criminal. This is criminal activity not to allow people to label their products. And how does Monsanto get away with not labeling? Didn't they try to destroy other producers that were labeling?
Yeah, they sued some dairies because they were labeling their products as non-RBGH, and they referred to a disclaimer in a white paper written by an FDA executive, which suggested, it didn't require, but it just suggested that if a dairy labels itself as products as non-RBGH, it should also include the statement that according to the FDA, there's no difference in cows that have been supplemented with RBGH compared to those that haven't been supplemented. Now, that sentence was written by Michael Taylor, Monsanto's former attorney, who later became Monsanto's vice president. It was never intended to be a requirement, but the lawyers for Monsanto touted it as if it was, and since then has been able to convince certain state governments to make it a requirement. And so now you'll see products that have that disclaimer on them, which is completely false because, in fact, the FDA's own scientists and even Monsanto's studies show that the milk from cows treated with bovine growth hormone has more pus, more antibiotics, more bovine growth hormone, and most especially more IGF-1, a very strong hormone that's linked to higher rates of breast cancer, prostate cancer, and colon cancer. It's also linked to higher rates of fraternal twins and is probably why the U.S. has much higher rates of those twins than the U.K., where RBGH is banned.
Do you think that in the times to come, there will be food labeling and people will have the courage to do it?
Oh, yeah. What we're going to do is this. We're going to create a tipping point of consumer rejection. We only need a small percentage of shoppers to do it, and I think between the shopping guide that we are circulating and the information that's now out there on the health dangers, it's pretty easy to convince people to avoid GMOs with a sense of urgency. Now, already, even without our evidence, more than half of Americans say that they would avoid GMOs if they were labeled. So we already have the majority on our side. So if we circulate the shopping guide and a little additional information to encourage those to go forward with this commitment, it will turn GMOs into a marketing liability. Once that happens, the grocery industry will stop lobbying against labeling because they'll have already taken GMOs out. Without their lobbying effort, and also with more people aware of and agitated about the health dangers of GMOs, the congressmen and senators will get the picture, and it'll be much easier to institute a very popular law because 95% of Americans want GMOs labeled. Even Obama said he would require labeling if elected, but he hasn't done it yet.
I wonder why.
Well, you see, there's so much evidence that if it was labeled, it would kick GMOs entirely out of the food supply because no one wants to put the skull and crossbones of contains GMOs on their label. And so the U.S. is dedicated right now to promoting GMOs. It's still the mandated position for the FDA. It's the mandated position for the State Department. And so by labeling it and giving consumers actual choice, they would destroy GMOs. And so in order to protect the economic interests of 5 biotech companies, they ignore the desire of 95% of Americans.
With this insidious global agenda, which is obviously what it is, how do you see a company like Monsanto, even if the market says no, being willing to walk away when they have billions involved in this?
Well, they have become the largest seed company on Earth. They bought Seminis, which is the largest fruit and vegetable seed company. They bought a lot of different companies up. So they can revert to conventional seed breeding. Furthermore, they can use the tools of biotechnology to do something what's called marker-assisted selection, where you identify the genes or gene families associated with certain traits. Then when you do natural breeding, instead of having to grow out all of the offspring to see which ones have those traits, you use an evaluation technique on a part of the plant to see if that plant has those genes or gene families, and then you just grow those. And so it makes the process of selective breeding sometimes quicker and sometimes less expensive. And so they can actually maintain their existence as a seed company using the tools of biotechnology and eliminating transgenics, where you'd actually take genes from different species and combine them artificially.
I think what you're describing is the company's potential to be on the good side for humanity and to do good things with the food supply. But I think